Most people have no idea that beneath Texas lies an entire hidden world quietly keeping the state alive. While you're cruising down Interstate 35, hundreds of feet below you, water is constantly moving. Not just a little, an entire underground system. Texas sits on top of massive aquifers like the Edwards Aquifer, Ogallala Aquifer, and Trinity Aquifer, stretching for miles beneath ranches, cities, highways, and open land. These underground reservoirs supply water to farms, cattle, rivers, springs, and millions of people every single day. And the wild part, you can actually see parts of this hidden world, if you know where to look. In the heart of Hays County, just outside the town of Wimberley, there's a place that looks almost unreal. It's called Jacob's Well. Crystal clear water flows through a quiet creek surrounded by trees and limestone cliffs. During the brutal Texas summers, locals and tourists gather there to cool off in water that stays around 68 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. From the surface, it looks like a hidden paradise. But beneath that calm water lies one of the most dangerous underwater cave systems in America. A cave so deadly it has swallowed experienced divers, trapped rescue teams, and kept one diver's remains hidden in its depths for 21 years. This is the terrifying story of Jacob's Well, and the divers who never made it back out. Jacob's Well isn't actually a well. It's an artesian spring connected to the Trinity Aquifer, a massive underground water reservoir stretching beneath much of Texas across roughly 91,000 square kilometers. So how are these underground water reservoirs formed? Texas has huge underground layers of limestone rock. Limestone is porous, meaning it contains tiny holes and cracks that allow water to move through it and become stored inside it. Over thousands, maybe even millions of years, water slowly dissolves parts of the limestone. Small cracks grow into larger tunnels, and eventually entire caves form underground. Those limestone layers then fill with water. That underground water-filled rock system is called an aquifer. Early settlers discovered the spring around the mid-1800s. Some believe it was named after Jacob de Cordova, one of Texas's earliest land agents, while others think the name came from the biblical story of Jacob's Well, a deep water source mentioned in the Bible. In the early 1900s, Jacob's Well flowed with incredible force. The pressure was so powerful that water reportedly shot several feet into the air. People couldn't even dive into it. The spring was later used as a water source and even helped power a sawmill, but over the decades, groundwater pressure dropped. The powerful fountain slowed. Eventually, the water became calm enough for swimmers and divers to enter. That change transformed Jacob's Well from a natural wonder into a death trap. At the surface, the opening is only around 3.6 meters across. But beneath the water lies an intricate labyrinth of flooded tunnels stretching more than 4,000 feet into the earth. The cave system is divided into multiple chambers. The first chamber is relatively open and brightly lit by sunlight from above. It feels fairly safe and open. Most casual swimmers stay here before quickly ascending back to the surface. For the daredevils, the descent continues through a vertical shaft roughly 30 feet down before angling deeper underground. But after that, the cave changes. The passages become narrower, darker, more unstable. The second chamber funnels downward toward a tight restriction known by divers as the birth canal. To pass through it, divers often have to remove their tanks and physically squeeze through openings barely wider than their own bodies. Beyond that lies the third chamber, a cramped room with unstable gravel floors and heavy sediment. One wrong movement can stir up silt and instantly reduce visibility to zero. And then comes the fourth chamber, the place that built Jacob's Well's terrifying reputation. The entrance is so narrow that divers must crawl through it while dragging their equipment behind them. The floor is made of loose gravel that can collapse at any moment. If a slide occurs, the passage seals shut, and inside a cave system that deep with limited air and no visibility, there is almost no chance of survival. Still, the danger only made the cave more irresistible. Experienced divers from across Texas came to Jacob's Well hoping to explore what few others had ever seen. Some never returned. On the night of September 9th, 1979, a group of divers from California arrived at Jacob's Well. Among them were two close friends from Pasadena, 20-year-old Kent Maupin and 21-year-old Mark Brashear. Both were experienced divers. Kent had been diving since childhood and worked as an assistant instructor at a dive shop. But neither man was properly trained for deep cave exploration, and that night they were about to attempt something incredibly dangerous. Shortly before midnight, while most of the group stayed above setting up camp, Kent and Mark decided they wanted to squeeze in a quick dive before bed. The pair had a goal. They wanted to reach the mysterious fourth chamber, a place already linked to multiple deaths. Other divers watched them descend through the first and second chambers. Everything seemed normal, until Kent suddenly removed his tank. He backed himself into the narrow opening leading toward Chamber 4. Mark followed immediately behind him. Another diver named Joe Moy watched in disbelief. Kent and Mark had no safety reel, no backup lights, and their steel tanks carried less air than the aluminum tanks used by many cave divers. Joe flashed his light repeatedly, trying to get their attention. He even banged on his tank with a knife. But neither diver responded. They disappeared into the darkness. Joe waited as long as he could. Then, realizing his own air supply was running low, he made a desperate decision. He left his flashlight pointing toward the passage, hoping the beam would guide them back, then swam toward the surface. But as he emerged from the water, something horrifying happened. The crystal clear spring suddenly turned brown. The water filled with silt. Joe immediately understood what it meant. Either Kent and Mark had panicked deep inside the tunnel, or the gravel passage had collapsed. Either way, they were probably dead. An hour later, former Navy diver and scuba instructor Don Dibble got the call. A recovery team was being assembled at Jacob's Well. By then, most already knew Kent Maupin and Mark Brashear were likely dead. When Don arrived before dawn, several divers had already failed to reach the men. One reported seeing their bodies trapped beneath a gravel collapse near Chamber 4. As the recovery team descended, they found the passage almost completely blocked. Every attempt to clear the gravel only caused more rock slides. Don pushed deeper anyway. Carrying a flashlight and a guideline, he squeezed into the narrow restriction. Then, suddenly the cave collapsed again. Rocks pinned both his arms, visibility disappeared, and his air began running out. Certain he was about to die in the same place as the divers he came to recover, Don later recalled wondering whether drowning or inhaling water would hurt less. In desperation, he violently thrashed until he finally broke free. Moments later, another diver forced a spare regulator into his mouth, saving his life. But during the struggle, Don had swallowed huge amounts of compressed air. As he surfaced, the pressure expanded inside his stomach and ruptured it. He was rushed into emergency surgery and barely survived. Even the recovery mission was nearly claiming more lives. Meanwhile, attempts to recover Kent and Mark continued. Teams brought in pumps, excavation equipment, and commercial diving crews. They tried vacuuming gravel out of the passage. They tried moving rocks by hand. They even tried cutting deeper into the collapse. But every time they cleared part of the tunnel, more debris slid back down. One diver nearly became trapped during another collapse. Eventually, after nearly 2 weeks, the search was called off. Jacob's Well had swallowed Kent and Mark, and it refused to give them back. After recovering from surgery, Don Dibble returned to the cave. Alongside other divers, he cemented a heavy metal grate over the lower chambers to prevent anyone else from entering. But months later, someone removed it. In its place was a message: "You can't keep us out." A heavier grate was later installed to stop unauthorized divers from entering the dangerous depths of Jacob's Well, but even that couldn't prevent another near tragedy in 2015. 21-year-old freediver Diego Adame descended nearly 100 feet when one of his flippers slipped off, leaving him struggling to swim back to the surface. With his lungs burning for oxygen, he abandoned the flipper and pushed upward with only one fin. "I thought of death and myself dying that day," he later recalled. Somehow, his training kept him calm long enough to survive. He reached the surface just as his body was beginning to shut down. a chilling reminder that Jacob's well can turn deadly in seconds.